I'm 32 years old, and I've been married to my husband 3-4 for 8 years. We met in our mid-20s, fell deeply in love, and built a life together that I've always been proud of. Like any relationship, our marriage has had its ups and downs, but in the past year, things have been especially challenging. About a year ago, we became friends with a younger man 28 through our social circle. At first, he was just a casual acquaintance, but over time, he became a regular part of our group. He was fun, charming, and easy to get along with, and both my husband and I appreciated having someone like him around. At some point, our friend began to open up to us about his personal life, particularly about his struggles with a longtime crush. He was interested in a woman he had known for years but lacked the confidence to ask her out. Since we were married and had some life experience, he turned to us for advice. My husband offered practical tips, while I tried to provide emotional encouragement. Over time, though, I noticed he started seeking my advice more often than my husband's. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, I assumed he just felt more comfortable talking to me because I was a woman and might better understand his perspective. However, during this same period, my marriage was going through a particularly rough patch. My husband and I had been arguing more frequently, and I often felt unappreciated and emotionally neglected. While I wasn't considering leaving my husband, I couldn't deny that I felt vulnerable. Our friend's situation made him emotionally vulnerable too. He finally worked up the courage to ask out the woman he liked, only to have her reject him. He was devastated, and I found myself offering him a shoulder to lean on. We began texting frequently at first about his heartbreak, but gradually about other things. We talked about our lives, our dreams, and our frustrations. Without realizing it, we became each other's confidants. It wasn't long before I started to feel something more than friendship. I tried to convince myself it was just a passing crush, but the more we talked, the harder it became to deny my feelings. One day, I decided to be honest with him. I told him I thought we were getting too close and suggested we take a step back for the sake of our friendship and my marriage. At first, he resisted the idea. He assured me that he valued our friendship and didn't want to lose the connection we had built. I explained that I wasn't comfortable with how close we had become and that I needed space to refocus on my marriage. Eventually, he agreed, and we didn't see or talk to each other much for almost 3 months. During that time, I worked hard to repair my marriage. My husband and I started going to counseling, and while things weren't perfect, we were making progress. I thought I had put my feelings for our friend behind me, but life had other plans. A few months later, tragedy struck. My husband's father passed away unexpectedly, and not long after, our friend also lost a close family member. Grief brought us back together. He reached out to check on my husband, and in the process, we began talking again. I told myself it was purely out of mutual support after all. We were both dealing with significant losses in our lives. As we spent more time together, our bond grew even stronger. This time, though, the dynamic felt different. Our friend started showing me more affection, both in his words and his actions. He would compliment me in ways that felt more personal than before, and he seemed to go out of his way to make me feel special. While I still hadn't crossed any physical boundaries, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I was emotionally cheating on my husband. I found myself thinking about our friend more than I should have, wondering what he was doing, looking forward to his messages, and even imagining what it might be like if things were different. At the same time, I felt immense guilt. I loved my husband and wanted to protect our marriage, but I also couldn't deny the connection I felt with our friend. I knew I needed to set boundaries, but I didn't know how to do it without damaging our friendship or hurting my husband. One evening, as I sat alone, I started to reflect on everything that had happened. I asked myself some hard questions. Was I prioritizing my friend's feelings over my husband's? Was I allowing myself to blur the lines between friendship and something more? And most importantly, was I being fair to my husband, who had been trying so hard to rebuild our relationship? Ultimately, I realized that while I hadn't done anything physical, I had crossed an emotional line. I hadn't been honest with myself about the impact this friendship was having on my marriage, and I knew I needed to make a change. The next day, I had a heart-to-heart conversation with my husband. I didn't tell him everything, but I did share that I had been feeling emotionally conflicted and wanted to focus on strengthening our relationship. He was understanding and supportive, which made me feel even more determined to set boundaries with our friend. I also had a conversation with our friend, explaining that while I valued our friendship, I needed to take a step back for the sake of my marriage. He was hurt but respectful of my decision, and we agreed to keep our interactions more casual moving forward. Looking back, I've learned a lot from this experience. I've realized how easy it is to blur emotional boundaries, especially when you're going through a tough time. I've also learned the importance of honesty, not just with others, but with yourself. While I still have moments of doubt and guilt, I'm committed to rebuilding the trust and connection in my marriage. I've also come to understand that emotional cheating can be just as damaging as physical infidelity, and I'm determined to never let myself cross that line again. Would you consider this kind of situation to be cheating, or is it just a gray area in relationships?